everybody. Welcome to the inaugural 1570 Project podcast. This is our spin-off show to the Burn Barrel podcast, where you can find me with Tom Shattuck 5 days a week. I'm not going to take up that much of your time. We're going to be here once a week, breaking down things that I think are interesting. You may have noticed back on the Burn Barrel, Tom cuts me off and talks over me a lot. So this is my space where I can kind of get to talk about things a little more in depth with people who are a little bit more considerate. So today I have with me my sister, Jane Nolen. She is an attorney. She is also a big fan of Taylor Swift, who I've been fascinated by lately because she's doing something that's totally new in the music industry. And also here to help break this down for me is my friend that I've known for years and years, Doug Palmieri, a program director at iHeart Radio, to let us know kind of the ins and outs of some of these kind of industry machinations that we're seeing happen here with Taylor Swift. So you might be wondering, why does Alice want to talk to us about Taylor Swift right now? Normally she's talking about politics and the Second Amendment and, all these other boring things. But today she wants to talk to us about this pop singer. So I'll let my sister kind of break this down. She's been following Taylor Swift for like 15 years. And why is it that Taylor Swift is in the news right now? What is she doing that's so unusual?
Yeah, so Taylor Swift is in the process of re-recording all of her old hits, the ones kind of everybody knows. So our song, You Belong With Me, Should Have Said No, her kind of classic hits that made her famous. And she initially recorded those with the record label Big Machine Records, with whom she had a kind of public falling out. And so she's re-recording them, and she's really making history because she's not just, other artists have re-recorded their music in the past to regain rights, and we'll get into exactly what she's doing legally, but it's really different because she's not only re-recording them, but she's re-releasing them and asking them to compete with her previous masters. So she's sort of competing against her earlier self, and it seems to really be working so far.
Well, yeah. So with the fans, for sure, on Spotify. So you mentioned the masters. That's like the main recording of the track, the one you hear when you go on the radio.
Yeah.
So, and I know that you and all the other Swifties have now, she's done this with one album so far. You've now gone through your music list and deleted the entire old album, and you're only listening to the new versions, which are almost indistinguishable. But so, how is that going to work, like, on the radio? I mean, Doug, you would know this more. So what are the radio stations going to do? Are we going to hear the new versions on the radio at all?
Yeah, I think it's a tricky question. There's a lot of relationships in radio with artists, but also with labels. And, there's a lot of things that go into that. And there's a lot of those relationships are pretty high up in these corporations, these big radio companies. So I think it's going to be interesting to see. But I think at the end of the day, radio sort of tries to give the people what they want. That's if the Swift fans and the majority of fans want to hear the song she's getting the money for, and not Scooter Braun, the guy who bought her entire catalog and who she had that big, falling out with publicly. I think radio will follow suit. At the end of the day, you're looking for more listeners, not fewer. And I don't think you're going to get the people who are anti-Taylor, which are few and far between, to make up that gap,
Yeah, I mean, it seems like for most people, I think people would either be kind of agnostic about it. I tried playing it for Tom, and he's like, I can't tell the difference. It sounds the same. but I think if you're somebody who really, who spent a lot of time listening to these songs, you can definitely tell in her voice. For me personally, I kind of prefer the old versions. So I know that that's like sacrilege, Jane. I'm sorry, but I feel that they're recorded in a particular time and place in her life, and you can't really quite recapture that. Her voice is different now. Her maturity level is different now. I mean, do you feel like you're missing something when you listen to them?
I mean, I totally hear what you're saying. You can hear her voice is younger. It's less trained. It's kind of now it sounds more mature. It sounds sort of like more emotional. I don't know how to explain it exactly, but you definitely can hear a difference. I think that's true. They're similar. She's made some specific legal or lyric changes in some of the songs that, if you're interested, fans on the Taylor Swift subreddit have completely broken down and analyzed what they mean and their digs at the record label, things like that. The other thing that's really unique and interesting is that Taylor actually added to the re-recorded album 6 songs that she wrote at the time that album was originally recorded, but that got cut from the album. And so I think that's another thing that kind of helps this album compete, is it's not just an identical copy of the original album. It has a few changes, a few stylistic changes, lyric changes, and then it also has these 6 other songs, which some of them are really good and I think would have been hits at that time as well. But I mean, it's an interesting, I've thought a lot about it because obviously I'm biased because I love Taylor and I support her and I'm going to support her decision here. And I think what she's doing is, you know, empowering and cool. But I've thought about whether I think her characterization of what happened is credible, or if I agree with her interpretation. And that the narrative, for those of you who don't know this as closely, is she signed with Big Machine in 2006 before she was a big star. She was a teenager, I think 17 or 14 actually.
Wait, she was born in 1989, was she not? So that would make her 17.
So, I have a quote that says he believed in her as a 14-year-old. So maybe he met her before she signed. But she originally she signed with, or was working with the CEO of Big Machine Records at that time, who was Scott Borchetta, and they had a really good relationship. There's video of Taylor thanking him for her career and helping her and all this stuff. And the fallout really happened years later when, I think in 2018, he sold the masters, so those are initial recordings, and the rights to them to Scooter Braun, with whom she does not get along. And
this was all tied in with the Kanye stuff too, right? Because he was part of making the video that Kanye made of her, where she was portrayed as being naked in it and stuff, and that stuff. Right. So she has reason to not like him, certainly.
Right, and her reasons for not liking him are valid. And her issue was that she wasn't consulted and she wasn't offered a chance to buy back her music. And it's an interesting point because, like, legally speaking, Scott and Scooter are doing what's within their contractual rights, and her stance isn't what you're doing is illegal, what you're doing is breach of contract. Hers is what you're doing is morally wrong. I'm the artist, this is my music, and you took advantage of a young girl. Like, the record label had too much power. But I mean, it's when you're a young artist, like, would she have been able to have the marketing, have the publicity, have the connections if she hadn't signed with them? And, like, you know, were those negotiations fair? So that's the part I think is really interesting.
Yeah, maybe not. I mean, I tend to think she seems to be the, like, Machiavellian character in this, really. Like, she talks about how at the time she had no power and she signed away these masters and now they own them. I mean, she's still going to make money off this music no matter what. I want to be clear about that. Like,
I mean, isn't there a situation, and as an attorney, you know, you probably know better than I do, but years and years ago, going back to the Motown years and before that, there were these artists who, you know, wrote songs, performed the songs, and got no money. All the money went to the record companies and the people who produced the records, and their managers a lot of the time made deals, and they literally were broke. You know, if they weren't touring and they weren't out there, they didn't make money. So they did change the law at a certain point where if you write a song, I think you always own a percentage of that song, right? Is it 50%?
Yeah. So it's super interesting because they kind of break it into different categories. So as soon as you write or create a song, like, it's yours. So a lot of people think for copyright, you have to actually, you know, file for copyright to protect it, or, you know, it's not going to be protected. Anyone can steal it. But all filing for copyright does is gives you sort of like the paperwork you need to be able to sue somebody else for impinging on your or infringing on your copyright. But as soon as you create something unique, be it a painting, a song, whatever, you have the right to that song. So
that's like to the music, to the melody, and to the lyrics, essentially.
To the melody and to the lyrics.
No matter who's singing it or recording it or whatever, you own it.
And that gets complicated when, say, it's like a rap song or trap song or something where the beat and the production becomes really involved mechanically in the song itself. And then sometimes the song ownership actually becomes like part the producer, part the singer, but ultimately the singer still retains like a portion of that copyright. And then what happens in contracts now in the music industry, from my understanding, I working from the law, so it's not exactly my expertise, but I did do some research and kind of parse through it. But usually artists will record, and if they're signing with a big record label, the big record label gets or can get the right to the masters. They can put in restrictions that stop the artist from re-recording the songs. They can get royalties on the song. They can, do different legal things to restrict the use of the song and maintain as much money as possible. So often they're structured where the record company gets like a big portion of the royalties. The singer gets a smaller portion, like 25% of the royalties, and then the producers get a percentage, like 3 to 5% of the singer's portion. So it's really interesting because essentially, like, what the singer is paying for is the clout and is the publicity and all of that when they're kind of signing away the rights. But I will say, I think singers with Taylor kind of on the scene, like Olivia Rodrigo, I know, spoke out and said, like, I made sure I have the rights to my masters after watching Taylor Swift go through this publicly. So I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah, but it is the kind of thing that, I mean, Taylor Swift is her parents seem solid and supportive of everything she's done. And these are things that have happened, I mean, going back years. I mean, Billy Joel had the big story where his management stole everything and he owned nothing at a certain point. And,
wow.
Right. I think, but you get it, if you're a kid and you're excited, it's more money than you've ever dreamed you were going to get. Sometimes the deal on paper can look really good, but a lot of the things you need to do to promote the album come out of your piece. So you'll pay for the recording time or you'll pay for the videos. You pay for it as the artist. The record company doesn't.
Right.
That was the thing that happened with Van Halen years ago. They didn't do any videos for one of their albums because the record company wanted them to pay. And they just said, no, we're not paying. So there are a lot of things that in the fine print, it must be very confusing. So I understand. I mean, it is tough sometimes when you see Taylor Swift and how successful and how wealthy and how just what a life she's got. And it does, you say, what's she complaining about? Like, but I do feel like it is okay just to be angry at somebody you really don't like owning your music. And the guy who sold it knows you don't like him. That had to be a slap in the face. And I think that, I've done, much more for much less, I guess, of a perceived slight. So I see where she's coming from. And I think, if it opens up the eyes and young people still getting into this business, and it's a completely different business than it was, before the digital age really was upon us, when you were selling records. Now it's all downloads, and the money that the artists make off the songs is very small. It's touring and it's merchandise and that kind of thing. So they need to be extra careful. But it is a big risk for a record company too. So the balance is tricky. Yeah,
and it's interesting because supposedly, this was like hundreds of millions of dollars that these masters were sold for to Scooter Braun and this bigger record company.
300 million, I think.
300 million. So, I mean, they made this investment in these masters, and she was barred for a while from re-recording. So hopefully they made enough money to make it worthwhile, because now, I mean, if all the Spotify downloads switch to the new versions, and, if radio stations start to switch over, and this isn't just, she did it with one album so far. It's 6 albums that they own, and that she's planning to do this with all of them, is already working on it. So that's a big financial hit.
And she has... Yeah, and she has already, I think, broken into, like, other industries with her new music, right? Ryan Reynolds, who's her friend, but he used her new recording of Love Story in his commercial for one of his products. And there's like a new Disney or Pixar movie coming out, Spirit, about like horses. That's using her new version of Wildest Dreams. And so, I mean, that's not necessarily like the music industry, but industry at large.
Yeah, and what's happening is another thing that she's doing beyond just re-recording the albums and hoping to replace them for downloads and all these things is she, as the songwriter, also has restrictive power over sync licenses, which is what they use for, like if somebody sings something in a movie or TV show, and she has stopped granting those. She can't stop the record label from making money off just like downloads of the old versions, but she can stop like TV shows from ever using the old versions. So they can't make any money off that. She's just made a blanket policy of refusing licenses for all those songs. So, you know, they're really screwed in a way. I can't believe that they didn't think that this was a possibility, the depths to which Taylor would go to screw them over. But, you know, I don't blame, just like I don't.
To her music, you would think they would know.
Right. She's like the girl who wrote the song Pictured and Burned, you know, like. But I think that I feel like, you know, they were in their rights to do this contract with a 16-year-old girl who didn't know what she was doing, and she's within her rights now that she's a little older and wiser and more savvy to do this to them. It's kind of incredible the lengths to which she's going, but I mean, I don't know. Do you think now, Doug, like you talked about some of these older examples of artists getting screwed over, and I know artists do feel really strongly about their work a lot of times. Do you think this is going to become more of a trend with artists who do own their own songwriting rights, that they're going to start to do this because this could really hurt the record company and the recording industry if this becomes a trend where artists just say like, sorry, no, now you can't make any more money off my music?
Well, they are doing something kind of that I've noticed over the last few years, and it is in commercials sometimes, on television shows and movies. If you're in any place that plays music publicly, they're licensing those songs. You can't just play a radio station or a CD in your business. You need to pay licensing for it. So there are services that provide that. Right. The old Muzak company, you could get contemporary music, not just that elevator stuff, but you pay them a licensing fee so the artists get their money. And what a lot of bands are doing, especially classic rock bands, bands from the 70s, is re-recording with the current band. You know how there's always like, it's the lead singer's the only guy that's still in the band, or the guitarist or whatever. So they're re-recording the songs, and I grew up listening to a lot of these songs. So when you hear something that's not right, you really notice it. You know, you're like, that's, you know, it might be the chorus or a beat change or something. And it's weird if you really are familiar with the songs like I am, but if you're a passive listener who's heard the songs just kicking around for years, you wouldn't notice. And that's a way for them to get a bigger portion of the money. You do it, you re-record it with a sessions band or something, so none of the guys in your original band are going to get the royalties on the new versions that you are now licensing. So yeah, there's a lot of different things, and a lot of, no offense, but lawyering going on, like what can we do whenever someone is getting a nice piece, someone's getting cut out. And that's sort of the way it is. And sometimes it's not like this where you can say there's a bad guy and a good guy. Regardless of the legality, you can say Taylor is right. What they did is scuzzy. Sometimes it's just a matter of there's a guy who just wants to make more money and he doesn't care who he cuts out, the new recordings.
Yeah, so I did see this story about the Rolling Stones. I don't know if this is true or not, but they famously, their song Start Me Up is in the original Windows 95 commercial. That was like really, it was a big deal when they put it in that commercial. And supposedly the guy who was working on the commercial was like, this isn't the original master of this song. This isn't what was recorded. Like, I know this really well. He just happened to be a big enough fan that he knew. And they had re-recorded it. Keith Richards and Mick Jagger who owned the rights to the music and lyrics, and so that they could cut out the other people who had a piece. So I don't know if that particular example is true, but I did see that out there floating around.
Yeah, because really the big money goes to the two. If it's Mick Jagger and Keith Richards they wrote it, and that's all theirs. And then they pay the bands off in a percentage. But if the band is not on the recording, the rest of the guys don't get anything. Keith and Mick will always get a piece because they are the creators of it.
Right.
And I know it's happened. I think the story we talked about, the the Start Me Up thing, and someone had talked about that happening with another classic rock band where they got the version they were going to use for this big commercial, and they were like, this isn't the original. It was just off just enough, that because you think about when things were recorded in the 70s on analog equipment, in these old 24 track or 48 track studios, and the producers back then were doing things really without a computer. Like it was the sound of the room or where you placed a microphone or whatever it was. To recreate that is almost impossible. Everything is done on the computer, almost post recording. All the effects and things are put on. So, I think that the music can lose something, and with the real fans, it's a problem. But if it's a commercial, or it's going to be in the background on Grey's Anatomy or whatever, it's like, all right, well, let's make the money, and who cares,
Right. And I honestly feel like I'm okay with the idea that the people who actually made up the song should get the most benefit from it for the longest amount of time. It's always sort of sat weirdly with me, the way you can like sell ownership of a creative work to somebody and then they own it. Like, it's odd to me that Michael Jackson's kids make money off the Beatles catalog. Like, it does. I mean, I know that like intellectual property is property and you can sell it, but it just like, it seems odd to me that when I listen to a Beatles song, Paris Jackson makes money. Like, it's just like, I don't think that like ownership of a creative work can really like transfer like that. I know that's like sort of philosophical, but that's what I think of when I think of these things.
Well, like, it's always tough. One of the big things people would always say when a rock band, especially, used a song in a commercial was they sold out. That band sold out. It's really common now, and common for those older artists to do it now, but for years they didn't. And I remember it was I think Bob Seger, Like a Rock for the Chevy trucks commercials he did for a while. And that was a big deal because he was a real working man, blue collar rock star, that he would never sell out. And I got into arguments. I said, if someone came to you and said, I will give you $2 million to use something you wrote and recorded 25 years ago, right now I'll give you $2 million. I'd be like, yeah, of course. Like, who cares if it's a Chevy's a good brand? He likes it. It's not going out there to do something offensive. So I think that was really when the dominoes started to fall. There's so much, such a huge change in the radio and records industry and how people make money that this is like a mad scramble to figure out who's going to be able to make the most off the new, which is still sort of in flux, paradigm in the industry, because it isn't records anymore. It's singles and it's downloads, but people can still steal downloads. So is it streaming? It's licensing. It's licensing is you got to pay me Spotify or you can't play it. You got to pay me Sirius XM. Every radio station pays licensing, and that's where all the money is right now. It's not sales to the individual anymore, and so I think it's going to get pretty weird in the next couple of years. They're in Congress now. They're debating how to pay royalties, and what is fair, because you'll put radio stations potentially out of business if they have to pay too much money to the artist. But the artist is saying, well, you wouldn't have radio without us, and radio is saying, well, you wouldn't be an artist without us. No one would know who you were. So there's this. It's got to.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's even true anymore with YouTube out there. I mean, to be honest, I'm not sure the last time I put on a music radio station, because I just play what I want on YouTube or Spotify or Pandora or whatever, and I honestly don't. And so Spotify and Pandora do pay fees, but Spotify has come under scrutiny before for not paying enough. Taylor Swift famously quit them a few years ago too, because they weren't paying artists enough. So I don't know, it is a weird thing. And doing podcasting too, podcasts are really like the Wild West of using other people's creative works. People keep doing it, like, and I'm like a rule follower, so I get very nervous about using stuff. I mean, in a way, YouTube's great for that, because YouTube lets you use stuff, but they just monetize it for the person that owns the content instead of for you. They just pay royalties essentially to whoever owns it. So because they can recognize what you've put on from when you upload it, they hear it.
Right. And they do know. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no, just when you use things in podcasts, as soon as something's on the internet, there are algorithms that are hunting for music, even bits of it. And it's amazing how quickly you'll get shut down, on the big platforms.
Oh, yeah, like
really
Spotify and stuff, Anchor. A lot of them will automatically grab content right off and like shut down accounts for it.
I've had it happen on Facebook where we were doing a Facebook Live for the radio station, and there was a song playing just in the room because we were on the air while we were doing it, and they blocked it because that song was coming through, and we weren't licensed to use it. Obviously, it was so even though the radio station's paying the licensing, that's just for the signal that you're licensed to air it on, and it's made the internet stuff tough because podcasts are so big. And you're right, even if you want to take a show you did on the radio and make it a podcast, you have to scrub all the copyrighted music off it. It's weird, and hopefully it gets easier at some point.
Right. I mean, I think that's one reason the YouTube thing is so good, because they have made it really easy. They don't usually take it down. Facebook will just take stuff right down. Tom always gets his videos muted because he's always taking videos like in the car and there's music playing, and his videos always end up muted by Facebook. But yeah, YouTube leaves stuff up usually, but they just then you can't make money off it. Whoever the artist is makes money off it. So I think that kind of incentivizes people to find something with a Creative Commons license or whatever. And YouTube has a pretty big library of free stuff. So I think they're really one of the platforms that's doing it better in terms of giving people the tools to do it in the right way so that they don't get in trouble, because they want people putting content up on there as much as the people want to put content on there. It's just a question of finding the way. And I think, you said like people still steal music. Like I think because there are so many platforms that have made it so easy to get music either free or very cheaply, that it's really undercut the illegal downloading market a lot.
LimeWire isn't really a thing anymore.
Right, LimeWire. There was Kaza too. Yeah, Napster. Those are the days when you could get in trouble, and that was a big deal. I mean, and people would track that too. There were kids when I was in college who would get in trouble because they would, like somebody downloaded, the university didn't offer HBO on campus. Like you couldn't get it. So somebody downloaded, what was it? It was the finale of, what's the show where they're like in Hollywood that was really popular around like 2005? Entourage. Somebody had to download the Entourage finale and got in huge trouble because they traced the university's IP, and the university doesn't want to be on the hook for all that money. Like they could come after the student all day, and the student doesn't have the money to pay HBO, but they could come after the university and do it. So.
I had an intern who downloaded one of the Spider-Man movies.
Oh wow!
They called me and they said, "What?" I went in. I'm like, "You can't download illegal movies to your work computer." But they all of this is gated by someone. I'm like, "Stop doing that." I said, "I'm not going to say it was you, but I know it was you. Don't do it again."
Yeah, not here. Do that on your own time, please.
Yes, do it at home. Yeah.
Exactly. So, I mean, but it gets back down to the issue of like ownership, like who owns something,
Right.
And
I was going to say too, just thinking about YouTube and all the other platforms for music, we were talking earlier about like the negotiations and what the record label brings to the table and what the artist brings, and that like cloud and publicity. And now with the internet, like that's not as valuable because there's ways to kind of publicize yourself and get yourself heard in a way that when it was just playing on the radio, like you needed a record company to have those connections and have those just like channels for you to get your music out there. But now, I mean, there are people who've gone viral with songs and have fans completely on their own. I mean, it's still valuable, but I feel like that value is significantly diminished.
Do you see people now who end up breaking through into the mainstream and on radio who never were signed to a record company?
No, it's still in its infancy, this whole way that music's out there. And I think both of you are significantly younger than I am, obviously. So you are certainly getting, things the way people will be getting things as we move forward. I think it's rolling that way. These businesses will probably figure out a way how to throttle it and monetize it, because that's how they survive. But radio and records is still an enormous. I mean, the amount of people you get and the number of people that really become successful virally is almost non-existent compared to the bands that make it with record company support. And there's a ton of money that goes into it, and a lot of it is for every Taylor Swift, there's 500 artists that were supposed to be big that these record companies threw a lot of money into that just stiffed and nobody cared about. You know, you need the most exposure you can get at the perfect time for you to get that exposure. And I think that's where the record companies and the radio stations and the, you know, I mean, now it's Sirius and XM and all the different, even you know, channels on YouTube and things like that, where it's that giant push that you need, and it's got to be at the perfect time. And there's a lot of thought and knowledge that goes into that. Like, what is going to break the next Taylor Swift? It isn't a YouTube video that goes viral over the course of a year to get, you know, I mean, you get things. Olivia Rodrigo is a great example. She is that driver's license was sort of a quirky song that became popular, but she's going to be a monster because she got signed. And the label,
I mean,
in
even
a way,
Bieber was a
benefits from
YouTube star too, right? Originally.
Yeah, he was playing drums in Canada. Yeah, people knew who he was. He was like, you know, a cat playing the piano. But when they got him, and they turned him into what he was. What is just and there's a talent and a science behind that these people really know very well. And it is hard with just, you know, hoping people find you. The number of people that if iHeart Radio says Taylor Swift's got a new single out and they're going to put it on 75 radio stations tomorrow, they're going to put it on all of their web assets, and it's all in one day. This new thing is coming. You can't miss it. You build that sort of intensity that it would be hard to do just if you and I were really talented and had a YouTube channel and we wanted, you know, to keep it small and build it ourselves and not have interference. Everybody eventually needs that interference. Billie Eilish and her brother were recording in her bedroom, and that's great. A lot of people saw it and liked it, and that's great for the record company because they say, well, we know they have it.
Already, you know, market tested.
Yeah, 2 million people love it, but we can get 75 million people worldwide to love it because we have that. So I think that they have to exist together if you want the big successes. But there's you know, what happens is you go into a room with you've been recording music with your brother that you love, and then the record company takes you in and they bring a producer in that tells you to change everything you're doing, and then, you know, they can be destructive too. It's happened, you know. But I do think that for a while, without radio and records, it would be difficult for the superstar to emerge the way they do now. I mean, even with American Idol, you think of all the press these kids get, and if, you know, even if they win, you don't know who half of them are in a year.
Yeah, I can think of like 3. I know who they are. And there's been how many seasons?
Like 20-something.
Exactly. And Clay Aiken is one of them. Let's face it, that wasn't a win for anybody. So, yeah, I don't know. I think that it's going to change, but, you know, people figure out how to capitalize on new technology, and the same old thing tends to happen. I think we want it to be very democratic, right? That everyone has a chance, and the internet helps that. We all have a voice, and that's great. But it's not really true. You know, the big the deep pockets have a much louder voice, I think.
Yeah, that's interesting. It makes me think of the whole K-pop industry. How much do you know about that? It's like
I'm just learning about
they're like churning out these pop superstars. So Korea is one of these countries where they assign you like what field you're going to go into when you're like high school age. You know, like they do the test and they're like, okay, you're going to be a plumber. Like you go to plumbing school. You're going to be a physicist. You go to physics school. And like one of the things that they put people into is, you know, being in a boy band or a girl band, girl group or whatever. Wow. So, and they're all like completely like Spice Girls manufactured, like tryouts. They put them in, but they train like all day. They're there like until 6 p.m. at night, these teenagers, and they train them like the dance moves, the outfits, they're like completely from high school age, like turned into these bands, and they're enormously successful. So when you say like people know what they're doing and like know how to hit it and turn people into stars, like there are definitely people out there, and they're always going to be doing it, and they're going to be competing with the people who are just like recording things in their basement for fun. So
yeah, the money makes it tough. And BTS is one of those K-pop bands I didn't know, but I had a record label representative come in and play the new song for me. It's a good song, moves, and it's cool. And she said, listen, take a picture with the platinum record from their last thing and post it on social media. And here are the hashtags you should use. Because I'm 50. I don't know. I'm like, hashtag what? So, but it was immediate, and because it's like BTS Army or something,
right.
So as soon as anything, it's like the Swifties. If something comes up about Taylor Swift on any, taggable social media, everyone knows it, and they like it if it's good, and if it's not, you're in trouble. They're coming after you. So it is amazing because I'm like, who the heck is it? What Korean pop band? How is this so popular? But it's international, and it's crazy.
It's huge.
Yeah,
it's really crazy.
Yeah,
go ahead.
That's funny. I know that Scooter Braun, like one of the first things when he was selling, he sold her masters again too. I think it's a big hedge fund, but when he was doing that, she went to try and negotiate with him, and before any negotiations about price or anything like that, he wanted her to sign, according to her, a ironclad NDA that said she could only say positive things about him, because I think he was tired of Swifties like harassing him on social media. I would not want to be publicly spoken negatively of by Taylor.
Taylor is one of those. I think that people in that industry might think it's us, because you see what happened to Whitney Houston and big artists from the 80s and 90s that got as big as you could get, but the record company still controlled everything. Right. And I think that these guys still think that's how it's going to work. And Taylor Swift, that's not Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift is a phenomenon. Right. And I think that she's, the fact that an artist was too big to go against, when artists like the Rolling Stones and Van Halen, and big rock bands, they got pushed around by their record labels all the time, and Taylor Swift said, it's not going to happen because you made me the biggest star on the planet, really,
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of nice to see.
Yeah. And that's super evident too. And part of this whole thing was one thing that came up in her contract. She wasn't allowed to re-record her songs till November 2020. And at the AMAs, she wanted to play her old music. And then she came out publicly and said, I really want to perform, but I'm not going to be able to because Scott Borchetta and Scooter Braun aren't letting me. And they're claiming that because it was a live stream, it could plausibly be a re-recording and in violation of the contract. And she basically said, they're only letting me if I sign that I'm not going to, re-record for another 20 years or whatever. And she was like, so sorry, I'm not going to be able to play. And then they got enough pushback publicly that they ended up just letting her perform at the AMAs. So yeah, to your point, she has all the power. Even though they had media claim, she still got to do it.
The industry can survive without Scooter Braun right now, it seems. But I think they need a Taylor Swift because she drives so much. She's a tastemaker as well. It's not just her music, because the last couple of albums have been pretty mediocre. But she's going to get all of the songs played. No offense, I know that you're a big fan, but comparatively, and I think that she just is. She's a household name in a way that not many people are. And I think everyone knows her. It doesn't matter if you're 65 or 16. And she has a great brand in terms of, she can misstep a lot more than your average person because she just seems so good as a person. Right. She's done enough of that positive sort of branding over her career. And I think it's genuine. I don't think it was done cynically at all, but I think that she's a tough one to mess with, even if you're right legally. Right. It's just not worth the fight. You look terrible.
Well, I think they're finding that out now financially, that it was not worth selling the masters away from her, because they're going to take a big hit on this. And I think part of it too with her especially is her very sort of public heartbreaks and love life, and the way that her music, she's been really open about the fact that this song was about my breakup with this other famous person that you all know about. Yeah. She's been super vulnerable and open about these things, and really let people into her world and her life in a way. And since she started singing, she was singing about, the high school boyfriend in a way that was, coming from her. This wasn't a cape, and obviously she had a record company behind her, but she was writing things that, I think you're the one who told me Our Song was written for her high school talent show. So she's writing
I'm not
this
sure if
song.
That's like an urban legend, but I think that's true.
You believe
I've
it?
Never actually Googled it, but I've heard that.
Yeah, that she's writing about these things, because she wants to write about them, and she's saying what she's feeling about it and what she's going through, and it was something that I think they can't quite capture on their own without a Taylor Swift to be that person who's the emotional center of that. And that with social media and YouTube and everything, fans have gotten to know her and feel that they're a part of her life in a way that, I don't know that people have been able to have that kind of access to the inner lives of musicians before.
Yeah, and she was not a manufactured star in that way. Her brand may have been by the record label and by some management, the country stuff early on. But she does. She creates her own music. A lot of artists are sort of hamstrung. They have great voices, but they don't have the creativity. It isn't theirs. I think that also made her stand out in a way, because it's like you said, this is her. In the song, it's her feelings, it's her emotion, it's her words, and that makes her someone that's much easier to root for when you've seen so much garbage come out of these labels that was sort of insincere. Her sincerity, I think, made her fantastic.
Yeah, I think there was some Miley Cyrus interview at one point where she was talking about the song like Party in the USA, and somebody asked her like, oh, what's the Jay-Z song that comes on? And she said, to be honest with you, there is no Jay-Z song. I didn't write this. This is not she goes, I think she said, this isn't even really my style of music. I love that everybody loves it, but it's not really, I'm not that into it.
Hannah Montana. That's what that was, right?
But yeah, I mean, so I think there's really something to that she's been behind her own brand in a way not a lot of artists are, and that you can't quite recapture when you have the manufactured brands. But obviously the record companies would prefer to have a piece of that if they can, and I think that it's certainly, I don't know that Taylor Swift would be who she was now without a record company and Big Machine and all those things. I don't know, Jane, how much do you think that plays into what she became?
I mean, I think a big part, and even just from her words, she's said multiple times, I mean, when she was receiving awards and stuff, very heartfelt things about, especially Scott Borchetta and Big Machine, and saying, you believed in me, you gave me the ability, they let her be true to herself in a lot of ways. They supported her. And I think until Scott Borchetta sold all of her masters and everything to Scooter Braun, I think she really felt grateful to them, or at least that's my understanding. And I mean, I think there's a reason she was thanking them, right? They did help her and shape her, but I think it's a symbiotic relationship. I think, she wouldn't have maybe got as far, but I don't think, to your point, Alf, they could have manufactured Taylor Swift. She's definitely one of a kind.
I think too, I mean, the thing that's hard with the whole sale and her relationship with Big Machine is you think about who can hurt you the most is the person that you're the closest to, the person you love the most, the person who you trust the most. So what they did with Scooter was probably far more painful than if she had just sort of a business relationship with a label that this is business, this is how they're going to operate. I don't have, I'm angry, but I'm not hurt. I think when you hurt someone, it's a completely different story, and that's how she responded, which was with strength. She didn't, play the victim, but I mean, not timidly. I guess she did play the victim to some extent, but it was aggressively, and I'm not going to take this. But I think it was. I mean, she was probably incredibly hurt by that, because I think she did feel really good about her relationship with Big Machine.
Yeah. So, I mean, do you think that that this is going to change the way these record companies write their contracts, that they're going to try and protect themselves from artists doing things like this now, that this is going to, make it harder for artists to own their own stuff forever?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's definitely a cautionary tale, but I think there's on both sides, right? It's the both sides are going to be very strong in their position. So it'll probably end in some sort of compromise where a record label needs the artist needs the record label. So I think it's going to be hard for one to well, it usually was the label that got the longer end of the stick. That probably won't happen anymore. But I don't think they're going to be able to just write this out of contracts because people just won't sign them. Right. And they'll find a label who will give them what they want if they're that good,
right.
you know.
Yeah, that it's certainly like a brave new world in the music industry, and I think Taylor is like always at the forefront of that. I mean, she's been a big genre switcher too. Like she was a country star, and I think a lot of people like couldn't really believe it when she came out with "Shake It Off," and that was like a total pop breakthrough crossover.
She got like kind of electric in reputation. It's like.
Well, yeah, and now she did these two most recent albums are like this folky, fluffy thing that nobody else was like doing that. She just decided like this is the kind of music I'm making now, and her fans went there with her. So I don't know, but yeah, if you're fighting the BTS army for dominance on the charts, I don't know who wins that one because
that is going to be tricky. I mean, and that these manufactured bands, right? Everything is manufactured, including the fan base. I mean, they're into it, but it is sort of a cult-like indoctrination into the artists and into the music, and they become very passionate about it. But these aren't the Beatles. This is like you said, 5 kids that have went to dance camp and singing camp together for 12 years. I wonder though, because again, everything is cyclical. Garbage makes money. People will create more garbage until people just won't buy garbage anymore. And then it goes back to artists that create something. I mean, rock radio, I always go back to just because I've always been in rock. But you think of the artists, the Led Zeppelins, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Van Halen, all of these artists that were unbelievably huge artists that really, changed music and changed the way the world looked at music and created a whole genre from the blues and pop of the 60s. And then we got Poison and Rat and Cinderella and all the hairband pop, bubblegum, really, but rock. And the backlash against that after a while was grunge, and you got these moaning Seattle misery cases that were far too, self-involved in a way, but it was, people were ready for that. And then that 80s stuff went away. So it's going to, I think that's where Taylor has been pretty impressive, and I think can remain when you're that big a star. You can remain relevant regardless of what the flavor of the day is. But that's hard for a lot of artists. Like K-pop will be huge, and then it won't be, and then it'll be whatever the new version of K-pop is in 4 years.
Yeah. Do you feel like we're in an especially? Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead, Jane.
I was just saying, I can't imagine BTS like singing a different genre of music.
Yeah, they have one genre.
They're not going acoustic anytime soon. BTS Unplugged isn't going to happen.
Yeah, no, I mean, do you think we're in an especially like highly produced era of music where it's very like manufactured more than usual?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things, every generation says this isn't music. Frank Sinatra was music, or this isn't music. Mozart was music, and then my parents were saying that heavy metal, it was the Beatles and Bob Dylan, and I really felt like I got to a certain age, and I'm saying this isn't music. What I grew up on was music, but I finally feel like I might be right. Like they ran out of new things to do. I don't know what the next thing is going to be, because everything is just recycled old, right? Even the K-pop type stuff is just a spin on the Backstreet Boys or New Kids on the Block or whatever, Frankie Valli. I mean, it's a manufactured group of cute kids that go out there and women are attracted to, but it's not anything different. It's not anything new. And I think we've gotten everything we can get out of traditional instruments. We went electric with guitars and basses, and that was a new sound. Now you do it digitally, or you do it with computers, and it's just something's lost there. It doesn't sound like it's being created by a soul in a way. And you even saw that one of the Beastie Boys were one of the great bands of all time, and they but when they really became great was when they went back to playing instruments and then mixing in the technical stuff with it. So yeah, I don't know. I wonder what's going to happen next. I just don't think it's going to happen with computers. I think it's going to have to be people creating something.
Yeah, I wonder
if it'll be a backlash to just sort of people playing with their ukuleles.
That happens every so often, so maybe.
Yeah. So Jane, actually, we're about to release her single, which was produced by Tom, which is her playing the ukulele.
Awesome.
So
I think that's huge.
So she's experimenting in independent artistry, but so we'll see what happens.
Does Tom sing on the track?
Tom does not sing on the track, no.
Okay.
But
Alice plays a little violin.
I do play a little violin on the track.
Nice. I will put that on my webpage for sure.
Yeah, so you can find her YouTube channel. It's going to be Jane Nolen. Actually, by the time this episode's actually up, the YouTube channel will probably be there, and you can see her single, Florida Sun, on there. So she's Jane Nolen on YouTube. And he is Doug Palmieri, again, of iHeart Radio. And I'm Alice Shattuck, and this is my new podcast, The 1570 Project.
Clouds rolled in and I said, must have brought the rain from Boston. But you looked at me and I felt the sun.